Reviewing the basics, part 6, and I'm also going to do part 7 in this video. So this will start with adding and subtracting of fractions, which weirdly is the more difficult operation than multiplying and dividing. I don't know, there's something about the way we learn adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing, that multiplying and dividing originally came later. We had to learn adding and subtracting first. And that makes sense here, but you're going to find that this is actually the harder thing to do, adding and subtracting. Okay, consider the following sum. 3/4 plus 1/8 that's rolling in there. Now 3/4 plus 1/8 can't really be done the way it sits there. What do we need in order to add these fractions? Now this is reaching way back, and it's so important. Like if you don't have this piece of information and you don't know the answer to this, that's no problem. But what you really need to make sure you do is write this down so that you know this for sure. When you're adding fractions, we need a common denominator. The two denominators you see in the picture there, the first denominator is a 4 because it's 3/4. The second denominator is an 8 because it's 1/8. And if we're going to add fractions, those two denominators have to be the same. Why? Why do we have to use a common denominator? Well, here's a little picture to show it. And what we're going to see is that if we're going to add two things, we need them to be objects of the same size. Or maybe the word should be of the same type. We need the same type of things before we can add them. Take a look at this, and sometimes these pictures are done with pizzas, and sometimes they're done with other versions of other shapes. But rectangles are handy. Rectangles are really handy to think about fractions. So let's just do a picture of 3/4. First, I'm going to divide this thing into 4 strips. I'm actually putting those beautiful garlic bread strips. You know, you divide this into 4 pieces because there's 4 of you at the table. So you break this up into 4 pieces, and 3/4 means 3 of those 4. And there's your lesson on fractions right there. When you all the learning you do on fractions all those years, it really comes down to this picture. When you're talking about 3/4, you're talking about 3 out of 4 pieces. That is, this thing's been divided into 4 pieces. So there's 3/4. Now, here's a picture of 1/8. Instead of quarters, I'm dividing this piece of garlic bread, if you want, into 8 slices. And 1/8 means I want to talk about one of those slices. So there's a picture of 1/8. Now, if we wanted to add 3/4 and 1/8, that's not easy to do because they're not the same type. They're not the same size. These garlic bread pieces are not all the same type. So what we do is we look at the 3/4 and we go, can we make this garlic bread pieces on the left-hand side and make them into the same size pieces? And sure we can. We can divide all of those pieces easily in half, and what we end up with is instead of 3/4, this particular picture isn't 3/4 anymore. Well, it is. It still is 3/4. It can also be thought of as 6/8. Now let's just rewind for a minute. You might remember it now. There was this move we could do with fractions that you could multiply the top and bottom by whatever you wanted, as long as you did the same thing top and bottom. And that's all that picture is doing. By dividing each garlic slice in 2, we're doubling everything. We're just doubling. Let's go back. Okay, so there was 3/4 over there. And by dividing each of the slices in 2, we double everything that's happening here. And so instead of 3/4, we've doubled both things, and now it's 6/8. Well, now adding the garlic pieces is easy. On the left-hand side, it's 6 out of 8 garlic pieces. On the right-hand side, it's 1 out of 8 garlic pieces, and we can put those together and get 7 out of 8 garlic pieces. I do want to mention something that gets a little complicated and is easy to forget. That's why these videos are here, so that you can go back later and watch this about adding fractions. With adding fractions, we do something that's a little mysterious if you don't really understand adding fractions. And this picture really shows what adding fractions is, 6/8 plus 1/8. And the mysterious thing we do is we add the numerators, 6 plus 1 is 7, but we keep the denominator the same. And if fractions have been difficult for you in the past, you should write that sentence down. To add fractions, we add the numerators and keep the denominator the same. That is a powerful, powerful sentence that will help you survive adding fractions and multiplying fractions, those two things. And I'll mention that sentence again later when we do this example. Here's a new example, 3/4 plus 2/5. Now, instead of drawing all the fancy pictures, we're going to do this with that trick I came up with, which is to say, I can take these fractions and I can multiply the top and bottom by whatever I want. as long as I do the same thing to both the numerator and the denominator. So what number am I going to use here? Okay, I want to get these so that they're the same on the bottom. So I could use 4. No, 4 is not going to work. Maybe 8. No, 8's not going to work. Maybe 12. No, 12's not going to work. 16. No, 16 is not going to work. 20. Oh, 20 is going to work. You see, all I did was count by 4s until I got to something that I could also count by 5s to get to. So on one side I'm going 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Those are all denominators I could use. On the other side I'm going 5, 10, 15, 20. Oh, 20's on both. And you might be thinking, well, don't you just multiply the denominators together? Well, yeah, that's another way to do it, is just multiply the denominators together. But you might not get the best denominator when you do that. If we want the lowest one, count by each of these numbers. Call 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. And count by this one, 5, 10, 15, 20. And when you get to the number that's on both this, then that's your denominator. Okay, so 20 is what I'm going to use. So what do? I take that number on that the fraction on the left, there are 3/4. I multiply both the top and bottom by 5, and I end up with 15 over 20. And the 2/5, I multiply both top and bottom by 4, and I get 8 over 20. So don't forget, if you multiply the denominator by a number, you must multiply the numerator by the same number. And so for the left-hand fraction, I used 5s. And for the right-hand fraction, I used 4s. Now comes that mysterious move that if you don't really understand your adding fractions, will seem mysterious. When you're adding fractions, we add the numerator, but keep the denominator. We add the 15 and the 8 and get 23, and we keep the denominator of 20. And that's a good answer. It's a really good answer, but hopefully you learned that 23/20. We want to put that into what we call mixed form when we get the chance, and write that as 1 3/20. Okay, we really want you to put that into mixed form. Another example, this time with subtraction. 5/6 minus 1/3. And I'm going to use my trick and my move again. I think it's the most powerful move to find common denominators is count by 6s, because that's the denominator of the first one. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. Then count by 3s. 3, 6. Oh, 6 will work. I don't have to go to 18. See, if you multiply the denominators together, you decide that 18 was the right choice, which will work. It's not like it won't work. It's just a lot more work. Here, 6 will be fine. So 5/6 I don't do anything with. 1/3 I multiply the top and bottom both by the number 2. I'm just going to write that in there. Pen. Oh, I'm on red, so I want to be on maybe yellow. So all I'm doing is I'm going to multiply the numerator by 2, but I'm going to multiply the denominator also by 2, and that's where the 2/6 comes from. Then, a lot like adding fractions to subtract fractions, I subtract the numerators, minus 2, keep the denominator the same. Yes? So 3/6, which isn't quite good enough, we want you to get to the point where every time you see a fraction like this, you reduce it, and so 3/6 reduces down to 1/2. And divide, so let me write that in there too. We can divide both the top and bottom by 3. We're extending that move out. You can multiply the top and bottom by anything you want, but you can also divide it by anything you want. And so we want to simplify these fractions as much as we can. 3/6 down to 1/2. Now, I don't know if you really should be told this at some point or right now, but what I want to tell you about the 3/6, and I want to leave this for a second and go to your calculator. And I want to type this question in with my calculator. I think it's important to know how to get your calculator to do these questions. Even though on quizzes and tests, we want to see all these steps. But it's important to be able to check your answers so you know whether things are right or not. Most calculators have a fraction button, so what you can type in is 5/6. Now mine shows it as 5/6, which is so nice. And these calculators are cheap now that show this. You might want to think about getting a calculator that actually shows fractions like this, because they can be 12 or 15 bucks, easy peasy, and it just makes your life a lot easier when you're trying to check these questions. And then I go minus 1/3, and I get 1/2. You see, it reduces the fraction for me. It sort of gives me a hint here that I should reduce these fractions. I really want you to use your calculator as a weapon here to remind yourself to do these reducing of fractions. And even if you didn't, you could type in 3/6 and your calculator knows enough to reduce it. And I want you to know how, it's an extra button there. 3/6 equals. Oh, something's happening here when I am hitting that on this particular calculator. 3/6. 1/2. There we go. I must have been pressing an extra key there or something like that. Okay, so make sure you're using the weapons available to you to think about reducing those fractions. I will mention that some people's calculators don't do that, that they show something different here. And I think I can show that on here by switching the mode here. And so some calculators, when you type in 356 to do this question, so I don't want you to think you can't do it on your calculator, I'll show this little R for ratio, 5/6 minus 1/3 is what the calculator's thinking there. But you just have to know when your calculator shows those little R's, and you'll get 1/2. So your calculator, even if it doesn't show what mine does, will still do the fractions. But okay. Those were simple adding and subtracting fractions. Later on, we'll get into adding and subtracting mixed fractions. Encourage you to jump ahead and do that homework. But you can watch the rest of this video first, because multiplying and dividing fractions is so nice that you can watch both lessons at once here. So there's the homework for adding and subtracting fractions in your textbook, page 497, 2-4. Make sure to check your answers. It's always important. And reviewing the basics, part 7. Now, multiplying and dividing fractions. Actually, the easier thing to do. I'm going to explain it, but there's just an easy move with multiplying and dividing. So here it comes. All right, what does 3/5 times 1/2 mean? Well, it means what it says it means. It says 3/5 of 1/2. But that's hard to comprehend. So here's a chance to really see what multiplying fractions really means. So if I want to do 3/5 of 1/2, I got to start with 1/2. So there's my garlic bread again. And so then what I want to show is 1/2 of the garlic bread. And then this says 3/5 of that. So 3/5 of the 1/2. So I'm not looking at the yellow part anymore. I'm just looking at the red part here. And in the red part, I want 3/5 of that. So I'm going to do 3/5 of the red part. I need to break it into 5 pieces. And 3/5 would be 3 of those pieces. Well, there's a wild picture. Let me tell you, fractions, that's really showing what this fraction question is all about. 3/5 of 1/2. That is, find 1/2 and then find 3/5 of that 1/2. And that all seems pretty complicated, except the answer comes out to something shockingly easy. 3/5 of 1/2 is 3 out of 10, 3 of the original 10 pieces. You say it wasn't originally 10 pieces. Yeah, I know, I turned them all into 10 pieces because, look, once it went fifths and then halves, I ended up with 5 pieces on the left-hand side there. If I do that to the other side of the garlic bread, I end up with a total of 10 pieces, and I only want 3 of them. That's what I ended up with, was 3/5 of the 1/2. Okay, you're confused. Let's just go back and try it again. 3/5 of 1/2 says start with 1/2. Then I want 3 of every 5 pieces of that 1/2. So of that 1/2, I only want 3 of the 5 pieces. What does that mean? Of the garlic bread, what did I get? I got 3 of the 10 pieces were there. Now, what you should notice right away is that if you want to get this result, you just have to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators, and you'll get the result. Now, that's not the same as adding and subtracting. Adding and subtracting, we added or subtracted the numerators, but kept the denominator. With multiplying, you don't do that. You actually get to multiply the bottoms. That's why it's easier. You don't have to remember anything. You just go top times top, bottom times bottom. It's so nice multiplying fractions. You just got to multiply them through. So some examples. You want to do 3/4 times 2/5. You multiply the tops, and you multiply the bottoms, and you get 6/20. Then you should reduce it. What will divide into both 6 and 20? Well, they're both even, so 2 divides into both of them, and I get 3/10. Next, 7/3 times 1/2. Multiply the tops, multiply the bottoms, and I get 7/6, which I should reduce. Not reduce, put into mixed form, 1 and 1/6. More on mixed form coming. So if mixed form isn't your deal, don't worry. We're going to do a whole lesson on that coming up when we finish reviewing the basics. But we just mentioned that here. We just throw that one in there so you can see that, yes, we do remember that some of these come out to improper or mixed. So, dividing fractions. based on the relationship between multiplication and division, which is that they're opposites. Division is the opposite of multiplication. To divide by a fraction, we can multiply by its reciprocal. In other words, we're going to do the opposite. Dividing is the opposite. So when we see a division question, we're going to turn it into its opposite and say, okay, dividing a fraction means multiplied by its opposite, and its opposite is the reciprocal. And that is such a nice shortcut for dividing fractions. For dividing fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So now it's multiplying, and so then I multiply the tops, and I multiply the bottoms, and that's so nice. And of course, we want to put it into mixed form. 32 fifteenths is 2 and 2 fifteenths because, well, how many 15ths do I have? Well, I have 32 of them, so that's 15 and another group of 15. That's 30. That gives me 2 wholes, and then there's 2 extra ones. If you want, it's like, okay, 32 fifteenths is 3 fifteenths, which is 2, plus another 2 fifteenths. Another division one. Here's one that might cause you trouble. 5/7 divided by 2, because you go back to my video and you say, okay, what did he say? To divide fractions, we flip the second fraction and multiply. But this second fraction doesn't look like a fraction. It's just a 2. And hopefully you saw this in grade 8, but if you didn't, okay, here's the first time you see it, and I'll explain it that way, is 2 can be thought of as a fraction. That's no problem. I can make 2 into a fraction, but the fraction would be 2 over 1. And I put over a 1. And so 2 over 1, it hasn't changed its value. It's still worth 2. And so that is an equivalent form of 2 over 1. And now it is a fraction. So I can use my rule, which is invert the second fraction and multiply. So I get 5/7 times 1/2. And then it's numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, 5/14. No reducing to do here. No, I don't have to go to mixed form, nothing like that. Okay, give it a try. 498, 2 to 4. Now, listen, it's really important you do all this homework. Even if you understood those lessons perfectly and you follow all that and you're like, oh, I know how to add and subtract and multiply, divide fractions, great. If that's true, this should go very fast, so it shouldn't be a big weight to you. But it is easy to get confused between adding and subtracting fractions, which was back here on page 497. What was it? 497, 2 to 4. And when you go to do multiplying and dividing, those can be, it can get a little confusing to go back and forth between the two. And in fact, if you're really doing, I suggest doing 497 like one question, then go to 498 and do one question, then back to 497. Just keep going back and forth and really challenge yourself to be able to tell the difference between multiplying and dividing fractions. And finally, I encourage you to go do that homework first before looking at the next video, which is order of operations with fractions, where things get really out of hand, and you better have all that multiplying, dividing, adding, and subtracting all down pat before you jump in there. So please, please, please go do the 497 and 498 homework first before you try and watch the next video. Okay? And if you have any trouble, go back and check out the videos or check in with your teacher, of course. Of course, we're there to help you. Okay, have a great day.